women being like, they don't get it. And I think men are the same way. And this is why I really appreciate this conversation, because as much as men's work is important and women's work, it's like we also have to understand each other and just like understand we are different, because I would say with men, it's like they just want to feel respect more than anything. And so a lot of women, or the feminine, they're like, they want to love on them or show, it's kind of like love languages, right? It's like they try to show love in the way that they want. But for a man, if you just tell them like you respect him or you really appreciate the way he does X, Y, and Z, that's going to go such a long way, right? And I think that for men, you're right, there's a lot of wounding, and we all have a lot of wounding, and some of that is innate to being men and women, and some of it is just innate to like our upbringing and childhood and all of this.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Mindful Evolution podcast. I am really excited to dive into today's conversation with my friend Taylor Sleaford. And Taylor and I today are going to dive into a topic that I believe is probably one of the most important topics that we could bring forward to the table. And that's going to be men's work, women's work, and the integration of both together, why they are important, and how doing this work independently and together can actually bring change to our collective and can bring shift in consciousness to the world around us on a small scale and on a large scale. So, Taylor, I'm so stoked to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Leah, I'm excited to be here as well. Thanks so much.
Of course. And I want to dive right in and ask you, what the hell is men's work?
Yeah, that's a great question. We'll see what's alive. Probably depending on what day you asked me, this answer might change. But yeah, essentially the way that I look at men's work is first understanding that men and women are different. And that doesn't mean that men are better than women or women are better than men. It's just we're different. Like innately, biologically, like there's a lot of differences. And men's work is really just an opportunity for men to be in a group, in a collective, in a community with other men. Like I think that's really, really important. And it's personal growth, but with the flavor of stepping into masculine leadership to embody, what I would call the integrated masculine or mature masculine, right? There's a lot of conversations around masculinity, and there's these terms like toxic masculinity. But essentially, men's work is just an opportunity for men to better know themselves and also become initiated is what I would talk about. We could go down a big rabbit hole, but for now I'll share that, in our modern world, most men aren't initiated. And what I mean by that is, if we look back to our ancestors or wherever you come from, at some point in history, you came from a tribal society. And in that tribe, as a boy got older and stepping into a man, there was an initiation. There was a rite of passage. There was teachings from father, uncle, elders about how to show up, about how to relate to other people, about how to lead yourself, how to lead others, how to hold yourself accountable, what your mission was in life. And so really I would say in the context of today, our modern world, like men's work starts to pull back the layers of these questions. Like what were we taught or not taught? And how can we shed the layers of like who we don't want to be or the habitual patterns that are holding us back from having freedom or loving the way that we want or leading the way we want? And simultaneously, like I don't think you can have men's work without the community, without other men, sharpening yourself, holding you accountable, inspiring you.
I love that, and I agree so much. I always say like women need their women, their sisters, and men need their brothers, because through the eyes of another, you get to more deeply see yourself. And through the eyes of another, you get to see different parts of yourself that maybe haven't been so integrated. And I'm hearing that in the work that you're doing with men, that one of the goals is to help them step more into that integrated masculine, to help them step more into that mature masculine. And so on the other side of that, what does that look like to be the immature masculine, or the unintegrated masculine?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to start by answering, in short, how I view the integrated masculine. And it really is a man who is connected to consciousness. Like the masculine in all of us, it's an energetic, right? So even women have, or I believe should have, a relationship to their masculine. And so it's all about consciousness. So the integrated masculine is a man who's connected to consciousness. He has depth, he can feel, and he's also connected to his heart. And I think that really, we could extrapolate that into a lot of things, but that very simply is what it means to be this integrated, mature masculine. And what we see a lot, the immature masculine, is really like this, Carl Jung would talk about this boy psychology, So maybe disconnected from feelings, maybe doesn't have this conscious awareness. I think that's where most men start, is like being able to relate and be aware of their emotions, of the situation. And then really they don't have the capacity to hold space or hold energy, right? Whether it's their own emotions, whether it's avoidance or addiction, right? Which kind of can flow together, So could be being lazy, could be binging Netflix, could be drugs, alcohol, porn, like all of these things are essentially a way to numb out, to like men just want to feel freedom. Like we want to be empty, and women want to feel love, and they, generally speaking, the feminine is really good at feeling energy or chaos or experience, and movement and flow. And a lot of men just want to feel empty, and so, or freedom. And I think that the immature masculine, what we see is men who don't know how, they haven't trained their nervous system to hold that capacity. They haven't pulled back the layers of depth. And this is where you see it expressed in a way that is irrational or abusive, or just immature in reality. And so there's a lot of different archetypes that we could go into of like, I'd say the most common is like, there's two spectrum. There's like the Marlboro man, the toxic masculine, this 1950s like rough and tough and rugged. And a lot of men today, it's like their fathers, their grandfathers, really stoic, not connected to feeling, aggressive. And then there's this nice guy archetype, which is we swung the pendulum too far, right? Is a people pleaser, doesn't have boundaries, can't say no, is really manipulative in the sense that, focus on others. It's that saying, happy wife, happy life. But then when he doesn't get the same love or things in return, he becomes bitter and resentful, right? And so these are kind of the two main pathways we see. And it's finding that common ground of like being strong in who you are and your boundaries, and also like giving and receiving love.
Yeah, and I see so much crossover between the wounds and the challenges that men face and the wounds and the challenges that women face. And I think oftentimes I hear both sides, the men and the women, saying, they just don't understand, or like my husband or my partner or my male friends, they just can't understand. And like vice versa, from the men's perspective, I'm sure they're probably like, oh yeah, like women just don't get it, they just don't understand. And in many ways, yes, that is true, right? And you and I have had conversations that go back to the tribal days, and how in tribes, men had to shut off the emotions. They had to shut off those feeling sensations so that they could go into the jungles, so that they could go into the woods, so that they could hunt and bring back food to feed the families and to support the stability of the families. And simultaneously, we do have these similar wounds of not wanting to be too much, and that almost like the armoring, right? To be strong and to fight back, because we are afraid to be seen, and we are afraid to let those walls down and be vulnerable. And so it's so interesting to hear some of the crossovers that the wounds of men have with the wounds of women, and no surprise, this isn't a new thing to me. And also for the listener, it's like, we are so much the same in many ways, and we are also so different in so many ways. And I'm curious, when you take men and you bring them into containers with their brothers, what is something or multiple things that you see that they are able to step into things that they're able to express, permission that they are given because they are in these beautiful containers only with other brothers.
Yeah, I love that question. It's interesting, something you said too, the women being like, they don't get it. And I think men are the same way. And this is why I really appreciate this conversation, because as much as men's work is important and women's work, it's like we also have to understand each other and just like understand we are different, because I would say with men, it's like they just want to feel respect more than anything. And so a lot of women, or the feminine, they're like, they want to love on them or show, it's kind of like love languages, right? It's like they try to show love in the way that they want. But for a man, if you just tell them like you respect him or you really appreciate the way he does X, Y, and Z, that's going to go such a long way, right? And I think that for men, you're right, there's a lot of wounding, and we all have a lot of wounding, and some of that is innate to being men and women, and some of it is just innate to like our upbringing in childhood and all of this. But the biggest thing for men in my program, the initiation, is where I start with men, and there's a lot of teachings, and we talk about masculinity, and we talk about these archetypes, we go through the king, warrior, magician, lover, but at its core, like the number one thing is community. And most men I've found really struggle to trust the masculine. And what I mean by that is they grew up in a world where, maybe their father was reactive and couldn't understand a young boy who was sensitive. Because actually most boys are sensitive. And then somewhere along the way, they get hardened because they're told boys don't cry, or you need to be tough, or rub some dirt on it, or whatever. And then even wounded from social settings, like growing up playing sports, or maybe, I know many men who, maybe dated someone earlier in their life, and then that relationship ended and their best friend started dating that person. And, or I know men who shared something emotionally as a young man or early on in their life, and they got made fun of. And it wasn't received well. So whether men realize it or not, the biggest thing is they have their guard, like they don't trust the masculine, And so where I start with authentic relating in my men's group. And I start by having them share and start to open up. And one of the things I actually do is I start with a sentence stem every single men's group. And it's, if you knew me, you would know. And we go around the circle and everyone shares. And as you can imagine, it starts off with, if you knew me, you would know I love snowboarding. If you knew me, you would know, I love going to the beach. If you knew me, you would know I'm a huge Denver Broncos fan, like whatever. So we go around, I'm like, cool. I learned a little bit about you, but now I want you to go a little deeper, like turn the dial up. What's something maybe you wouldn't share with most men, right? And then I start off and I share something really vulnerable. Like I struggled with depression a lot early on in my life, and then the next guy goes and he shares something a little deeper, like maybe I've been divorced, or I struggle with addiction, or, and every time we play this a few times, and every round it gets deeper. And then usually what happens when we're done, one guy is like, wait, like whoever went first, he's like, can I go again? I feel like I could have gone deeper. Because every time someone shares, then it opens up another door. And by the end of it, I ask, how did that feel? How did it feel to receive? How did it feel to share? And a lot of guys in the sharing are like, I'm sweaty. My heart is racing. I was so nervous. And then when they share what it was like to receive, they're like, oh, I resonate with that. I resonate with that. And at the end, we all feel closer. There's more intimacy, right? And intimacy is this is something I teach. It's not just sexual. It's about revealing your experience with one another. And this is a practice. And so part of this, and part of what I teach with men's work, and I imagine this is similar to women's work, is it's a skill. Like a lot of this is a skill that we were never taught. We never learned how to communicate and relate and share what's true. And then the other aspect I would say is men they don't know how to connect to what they're feeling. I'll ask, how did that feel to share? And they start going into story, and I know you know all about stories, and they're like, oh, well, when I said this before, and I'm like, whoa. Like in your body, do you feel anything in your body? They're like, oh yeah, my heart is racing, right? And so these are just skills that I help develop. But what's cool is that by the end of night one, our first call, all of a sudden the guards are down. Everyone's relaxed. It's like all the cards on the table, But what I'll say is we have to create safe containers for this, because even in the world of men's work, there's a lot of men's coaches out there who I don't trust. Like energetically, they feel leaky to me. Like I don't trust their energy. I don't feel like I wouldn't feel safe in a space to share, you know? So I think this is going back to trusting the masculine, is maybe men have tried that and it hasn't been a safe container, you know? And I think the world is telling men, hey, you need to be more in touch with your emotions. You need to be more feminine. You need to feel more. And it's like, yes, and it needs to be in the right space at the right time, you know? And we could dive into vulnerability, but I think when it comes to vulnerability, it's like, you don't just spill everyone to everyone, because it has to be in a space where it can be, where someone can actually hold you, you know? And part of me running this container is I'm doing the work, and I have the capacity to hold, like, I know that I'm opening a massive door by these questions, by what people might share, you know, physical abuse, sexual abuse, addictions, whatever. And it's like, I'm taking a big responsibility saying, cool, I'm going to hold this container, you know? So I said a lot there, but that's the first thing that comes to mind.
I love that. And I think you bring up a really, really important point that I find is medicine for every person that comes into my world. And that is being discerning around who you bring your experience to, and how much of yourself you share with another person, how much you actually open. And this starts to bring in the masculine and feminine energetics, right? Because the masculine energetics gets to hold that container for the feminine experiencing, for the feminine emotions, for the feminine feelings. And what I see so commonly, especially in women, is them having the expectation that this person can hold all of them, that they're going to feel seen, that they're going to feel supported, that they're going to feel heard. And so they go to this person and then they find themselves extremely disappointed and extremely hurt, because this person actually cannot hold them in the ways that they are seeking and craving to be held. And I know this is something that we can go deeper into around like the masculine work and the feminine work, and how this does create things like divine relationship, divine partnership, and like mature relationship and mature partnership, right? Because when we don't use discernment around who we allow, and that's the biggest thing for me, is it's what we independently are allowing from ourselves or from another person, because nobody's doing anything to you. At the end of the day, it's what is it that you actually are allowing. And so if you're allowing yourself to be held by somebody that's actually not holding this foundational, supportive, safe space that feels safe for you, then you end up feeling the pain, the disappointment, the maybe the rejection that is within you, because you've allowed something that actually isn't in alignment with what you need, that actually isn't supportive for what you need. And that, especially in women, is what I see leads them to retreat, leads them to not trust the feminine, leads them to not trust the masculine, leads them into this space of hyper independence where they're like, I got this, I can do this on my own. And yes, independence is important. And when we start to have the pendulum swing too much into the other side, where it's like, I don't need anyone and I got this totally by myself, then we start to have some other areas to dive into the work with. Because, you know, at the end of the day, I am a true believer that you should feel unshakable and should feel like you've got yourself, that you know how to support yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, energetically. And that doesn't mean that you don't need anyone. That actually means that you know when you've got you on your own, and you know when to reach out to somebody else and who to reach out to ask to hold you and to support you, because you've discerned that this person can do that. And, you know, even in a space where maybe you ask someone for support and in the moment they can't support you, I know for myself, like my past self would have like spiraled and be like, oh my God, I don't have anyone, I need support. Versus now it's like, well, I got myself until this person can show up for me and can create the space for me. And I love that what you're saying here around like really being discerning of the people that you're going to and the spaces that you're asking to be held in it, because it's so important to be able to trust the people around you and feel supported by the people around you.
Yeah, okay, this is great. There's so many things, so many threads here. One, I want to talk to the women for a second because I see this a lot where, and again, the context I'll use for the masculine and the feminine is like we see this in nature, right? In a river, the masculine is the rocks, it's holding the space, the container, and the feminine is the water, it's flowing, it's creativity, it's the energy, and so we all have this, but women go to, like, I have one of my good friends, she's dating, and she was sharing with me the other day how she was seeing this man and shared all this vulnerable stuff, and he just kind of didn't say anything and just was stoic. And my response to her was like, hey, give him a little grace. Like, I see this all the time. He hasn't learned. He never learned. He doesn't know how to. It's probably not that he doesn't want to. And I even see this with some of my guy friends. Like, I'll share, because I'm in this space, I'll share hard things I'm going through, and they won't know how. Like, I've seen this with my father. Like, he does, relationship stuff I bring to him, and he just doesn't know how because he was never taught. So, giving some grace, but also what I told my friend is I was like, yeah, this is not the man for you, because there are men out there who can hold space, so this is an indicator. And I would say, depending where you're at in a relationship, just understand, as you said earlier, like, women have a much bigger head start. If we go back to, again, people in our society can get upset about gender roles, but if we go back to these tribal settings, like, there were gender roles for a reason, right? Like women are so powerful because they can give birth. Like, this is something men can't do. So we go and we hunt and we kill and all this stuff, which our nervous system became more dense, so that we could shut off. And so women, or the feminine generally, are more sensitive, more connected to their emotions, like better at feeling, which is so powerful. It's nurturing, but it's also like this, I don't know, we could call it witchy for lack of a better term, but just this awareness of the
I
space.
love that.
Like, relate,
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, I tell men, it's like the feminine is your oracle. Like, sometimes it's confronting as fuck, even for me, but women know. Like, when they say something or they're poking, it's like, they know, right? And that's part of that sensitivity. And so, for women who are frustrating, just understand that, like, hey, this might be new. And like, you have all these emotions. And even like you said, context is important. It's like, hey, are you open to, holding space for me right now? And that could be a whole nother conversation around communication. And that's why too, I think like men's and women's groups are so important, because I see in relationship where it ends up becoming like emotional dumping. I know I've had this in past relationships where it's like, oh, I want to share, and then I want to share. And it's like, because the tables can turn too, where I hear a lot of women, again, a lot, not all, saying they want their men to open up more. They want them to share their emotions. They want them to feel. And then when they do, all of a sudden, like, what I've heard from women is like they trust him less, or it's like unattractive, because the thing they thought they wanted is all of a sudden your man is stepping into his feminine, and now you have to step into your masculine to hold the space, and I'm not saying that, I think there should be containers for this. And that's why, like, hey, do you have time? Can you hold space for me so I can share? Because even me sharing what's going on for me, whoever's holding that, whether it's a woman or a man, like, they're in their masculine holding the space, I'm in my feminine sharing, moving energy. But I think that's why it's important for both men and women to have also these circles where they're not relying on one person, because that's where codependency is created. I'm going to take this to my men's group. Not to say that you don't share if you're struggling, but it's like, hey, my guys got me, I'm good, sort of thing, right? And the other thing that, this is what I believe, is, touching on the subject of, we see there's a lot of female empowerment, which I think is beautiful. And the patriarchy, I'll be the first to admit, has fucked up a lot of things. And women have been suppressed and all this stuff. But actually what's created, this goes into the feminist movement and even like the nice guy archetype, is women who are like, okay, well, I'm going to, be this boss babe and work in my career and all of this stuff. And then also now I want to have a family. Now they're holding everything, right? Which is a lot. And as you said, this independence of like, I got myself, I don't need anyone, right? But the polarity in relationship, like a masculine man, it's not going to be as attractive, And I think to your point of what you're saying, where it's like I like the word you used, unshakable. And what I believe is like a woman, or the feminine, surrendering to a man is the biggest gift. Like, being able to like allow herself to be in her feminine, right? It doesn't mean, it's not anything negative. I think it's actually beautiful, right? Which can allow her to be unshakable in her knowing. And what I'll say is that's the biggest gift, and that has to be earned, right? It has to be a man who is doing the work. It has to be an integrated, mature masculine who can hold the space. And that is not where, I think where that statement gets misconstrued is it's too early, where a woman might surrender or like allow a man to lead, and it's like he hasn't built that trust yet, you know? So it's not like day one, but this is why I'm doing a lot of the work with men that I'm doing. And I've been in relationships where there was a lot of pushback, you know? The woman I was with is like very masculine, this is how I want, you know, whatever. And then especially as I got deeper into this work, I was more trustable. I was more grounded, you know, and she could feel that, and then she could start to open up. And then it was actually like joyful for her to be in that space.
Yeah, I think something that's really beautiful as you're talking about this concept of like conscious collapsing, where a woman can just like fully collapse into the arms of the masculine and trust that she is fully held. And you know, I that does apply as well to men with their brothers and women with their sisters as well. Like to be able to use discernment so that you know and that you trust that this person has got you, that they can support you as you consciously collapse, as you take all of your armor off, as you take all of your shields down, and you just allow yourself to just melt into this container that you hopefully have requested to be held for you. And you know, what I will say on this as well is the more that you do dive into your personal work and the more that you do look at yourself from different perspectives, the deeper you dive into your healing, you get a feel faster for the people in your life that can hold this space for you. You know, I've come across people, you know, where I'm like immediately like, oh, wow, okay. Within the first like 24, 48 hours of knowing this person, I'm like, you are deep sisters, you are deep brothers. Like you can hold me if I ask that, or if I need you to. Like I trust based off of the conversations we're having, the questions I'm asking, the ways that I'm feeling into your energetics, witnessing you move through the world, that you can hold me and support me. And, you know, again, as you dive deeper into yourself, you can discern, in my opinion, more quickly who you can trust and who maybe you don't fully take down all your armor with. I want to share an experience that I recently had when I was in Costa Rica. It was a really, really challenging journey for me, and also a very, very powerful journey with a lot of medicine for me in many ways. But I had a really beautiful experience. I attended the Envision Festival, and it was like 7 days camping in a tent, 95 degrees, 75 plus humidity, like people getting sick left and right. I got food poisoning at one point. It was a pretty gnarly experience. The whole time I was like, this is preparing me for Burning Man. This is preparing me for Burning Man. So the other side of the experience, I had a friend, somebody that I had started relating with, and we were navigating what is this space for us. And during the festival, I actually showed up in very divine timing, was placed along his path, and was able to support him in a time that he was not capable of supporting himself. And I showed up and I held that space, and I offered that feminine nurturing, like, hey, I've got you, let me support you. And he allowed me to support him. And on the other side of the festival, I found myself roles reversed. And I found myself in a place where I was trying to do everything I could to hold myself together in that masculine, like, I got me space, I can hold the container for myself. And in reality, I really fucking couldn't at the time. And I wasn't around really anyone that I trusted to also hold me in that space. And I ended up accepting the offer to be supported by this person, by this man, and had this really beautiful experience where I was just held in this very safe container by him. He took care of everything from feeding me to putting me to sleep to just like helping me like revitalize my body, because I did not have the capability of doing that for myself in the moment. And it was a really powerful moment for me, showing up at this hotel that he was staying at and just like walked in the door, laid on the bed, and just like completely just like broke down. And it was the first time that I allowed myself to completely take down all of the walls of that like independence to allow this person to care for my livelihood. And it was this really the first time that I think I've ever experienced this like true 100% trusting to like consciously collapse into the arms of the masculine. And, you know, I would not have been able to experience that had I not been able to discern that it is safe to trust this person and have had the ability to like get to know them enough to be like, oh yeah, like they've got me and I trust their word. You know, and in the past, I might have done that into the arms of somebody that couldn't actually support me. And so I wasn't actually revitalized and supported in the ways that I needed to be. And I think that this is a really beautiful example of what can happen and what can be created between men and women when men dive deeper into their work, are capable of, or I should say, step into spaces with their brothers and like learn, like you said, how to hold themselves, how to hold that stability, how to hold that container and trust that they can do that. And also open to the uncomfortable emotions that a woman might bring to the table. And, you know, one of the things as well is like with men, and you and I have had these conversations, if men aren't familiar with going to the depths of the emotion within themselves, how can they actually hold the space in the container for women who may come to them with all of those emotions? And then roles reversed with women, you know, the importance of them being with their sisters and allowing themselves to be seen, to get vulnerable, learning how to trust and who to trust, so that they can bring this forward. They can meet the masculine can meet the feminine, and there can be these safe containers that are created between the male and the female where the masculine can hold this very strong, sturdy, stable container for all of the chaos, all of the messiness, all of the emotions, all of the feelings, and women can actually feel safe and supported in being in all of that.
Yeah, I mean, something that comes up for me and is so true for so many men is this like lone wolf mentality. It's why I called my monthly men's membership the pack, because we're stronger together, you know. And it's so many men don't want to be seen as weak, and it's just this conditioning that's inside us that we have to do it, we can't open up, right? And it's tough, even for me, like allowing myself, it's like a practice for me right now to ask for help. You know, even it's an exercise where like, even if it's not something big, like, hey, can you give me a ride to the airport? You know, something like that, because it's so conditioned where like I have to have it all together. But the only way that men can really show up in the world as leaders and hold that space is have a place where they're held. And it's this intersection between, like you said, like discerning between like, is this a safe space? Because often too, what can happen is men get into this work and they see how liberating it is to like, I mean, I started a new cohort last week of my men's group, and after the first call, you know, immediately everyone's like, I feel incredible. I've shared things that nobody knows about me, and it's liberating, it's freeing, and all of this stuff. And what can happen sometimes is it feels so good, then they just want to share with everyone. You know, but then that's not a safe space, and that's where they get wounded, you know, and that sort of thing. And so it's starting to understand, and for you, right, that sounds like massive growth to be able to feel into like, okay, this is someone I can trust. And I think that's the learned behavior, and that's what I'm trying to create in my container, and I am creating, is leading from the front, like, hey, you can share something and I can hold it. And also like, I can just say, hey, I hear you. You know, I can sit with you. Like, I don't have to just give you advice. I don't have to solve your problem, which is also like very, you know, a masculine thing to do, because I know we've talked about like a big wound of the feminine is like, I'm too much. And generally speaking, like the feminine is a lot of energy and movement and flow, and like it's beautiful. And it can feel for the masculine like another thing if, you know, they don't have their house in order, if they don't have a space to like move their energy, you know? So it's, I mean, we all need it. And this goes back to, again, what we talked about at the beginning, these tribal communities. Like we had community, we had cohesiveness. And now it's like with society, we are more connected to the world than ever through social media and internet and all of this stuff, but we don't have deep, meaningful, real relationships. and we're constantly comparing everyone. And so, I mean, the deeper I get into men's work, like I went to a retreat with 70 other men a month ago, and it's just crazy. Like every day as men start sharing, it's like, oh, I struggle with that. And I'm like, oh, all these men who like on the surface are very successful in their careers and their life and all this stuff. And it's like, oh, we kind of all got the same problems, just different flavors,
Yeah, that brings up a memory for me. I was also recently in a very powerful container in Costa Rica, 15-day somatic leadership immersion. And one of the activities and exercises that we did in this container was nonverbal. And we all stood on one side of the line. And someone was like, oh, this is what they do in jails. But we all stood on one side of the line, and they asked a question. And they said, step over the line if, and insert blank. And because it was nonverbal, you only got to see, to witness, and to energetically hold space for the people that are walking over the line. And when you walk over the line, if that applies to you, you actually get to see that you're not alone and that there's all these other people that have actually been through such a similar experience. And it was a really, really powerful activity for me to just be like, wow, like, I know other people go through these same things. But I did find myself in this container a little bit further along in my journey of healing and self-development and holding spaces and leadership. And so it was a very humbling activity for me to see that these other people are also sitting with, experiencing, feeling the same things, regardless of where they are on their journey. And it allowed me to soften and to get more vulnerable and to take my walls down. And it's beautiful when you can step into a space and see the medicine that you're bringing into a space. I think that shows so much about you and helps you really really harness yes, this is me and this is the medicine that I have to bring, and this is how I impact other people. Having that mirror from others. And yeah, just very beautiful to witness what happened for me when I stepped over that line. And somehow we opened up into a verbal share and tried to verbally share. And then just all the emotions, all the tears. And everyone was like, wow, she's not just super strong. Like, she's got feelings and emotions too. And as I'm sitting there expressing my emotions, there were 5 other people that crossed over the line. And I was like, oh yes, this is my medicine of vulnerability that creates such a strong impact on the people around me. And I think that is what is so powerful about doing this work on both sides, right? And even independently, doing the work within your masculine and doing the work within your feminine, to be able to be with both. Because when you step into all that you are, and when you allow yourself to be so authentically expressed, you therefore lead yourself more powerfully. When you trust yourself, when you know yourself, when you can fully step into who you are and who you're meant to be and who you want to be, right? Because desires are important too. Then you get to lead yourself more powerfully. And as you step into that self-leadership, you then get to be a more powerful example for the people around you as to what is possible for themselves, and you become an inspiration to all of them. You give them permission by being vulnerable in your most authentic self.
Yeah, I mean, that's what a lot of this comes down to is having confidence and belief in yourself. And this is not just a masculine thing, but so many men, it's again, conditioning and these stories that we have of who we are and how we're supposed to show up. And this is what I see a lot in relationship. Most of it is subconscious, because even, in the one-on-one work I do, I work with a lot of women, and a lot of it comes up with relationship, and we don't realize, these habitual ways of being that we show up, where it's and this is for both men and women, often, if we find ourselves in that same relationship with a man who's not emotionally available, or, a woman who, can't open up fully, it's something in us that we're attracting that, and so a lot of this work and through all these practices and just having a place to be witnessed and to be seen, we can start to let go, to shed that old skin, shed those layers, and just show up us, and be, more us, and that in a relationship, that's more attractive anyways, but that's really what people want. And I think especially early on, that's what we see. That's why there's this honeymoon phase where everything's great. And then you get to a point where it's like the layers start to come back, and it's because you stop being who you thought you were supposed to be, or like pretending. And instead, when you can be rooted in who you are and your knowing, it's better for everyone, really.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I want to see everyone be all of who they are. And that's part of that deconditioning, is looking at how have I been people pleasing, or how have I been showing up to try to be this person that I think everybody else wants me to be, to act or show up or speak or talk or dress or walk in this way that I thought was what was going to make me feel accepted or bring loving support into my life. And in reality, the more you are, the more connection, the more intimacy, the more healthy relationships you're going to have in your world, because you're not being anybody other than you. And that's stripping the layers back to be like, oh, here I am. You earlier you were talking specifically, you brought up your father, and I feel this deeply, how sometimes like my parents can't fully see me where I am, and I'll share these things and they just like, they don't always respond in the way that I'm like, oh, I'm like, that one stung a little bit, but I also have compassion because I know that they're just not there. And one of the things that you were talking about was they just don't know how to hold it. And I'm curious, when you're working with men, if there's like, I'm just going to ask, like, how do you teach someone without pouring all of your energy into something, right? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make the horse drink. How do you teach someone and lead someone in men's work to hold it?
Yeah, it's really timely that you say this. So, one, I think that men's work, it's so impactful. A lot of the work that I've done has been one-on-one for so long. And that's me holding in the container of someone else. But it's experiential, and what's powerful within the group is, one, they're witnessing me. So if someone asks a question, they see how I hold space. And even if this is subconscious, they see, that I listen, or that I just say, oh, how does that feel to share? I don't go into like giving direction and things like that. And there's also shifts that happen, when another man shares. And even if you're just listening, like you start to receive that. And so you can relate. But to be honest, it's all embodiment. It's all through the breath. And this is actually something I have a men's group call tonight, and I'm going to add a practice. There's been conversations around old identities and habitual patterns and being hard on ourselves, and why do these things just keep coming up? And this is men's work. This is also the one-on-one work I do, where people feel stuck in like this identity. I'm actually creating a program around helping people shift identities, because that's what I realize, that's pretty much all I do, is I just help them figure out where they are, where they want to go. And I would say most people, I imagine probably your listeners, like my audience, is like they're aware, they're in personal growth, they have this awareness, but it's like, how do we actually shift past that? And the thing is, I'm sure you would agree with this based on what I know about you, is like, it's in the body. Like, you can't fix a mental problem with just thought, you can't fix a physical problem with just the mind. And this is where most people miss that, if we go back to trauma, and a lot of research is showing this, it's like, it's actually in our cells, in our tissues, and so the reactivity, like I do a lot of shadow work too, where, anytime we feel triggered, or, there's like a criticism and we immediately snap at someone, that is like our nervous system getting hijacked. That's a reaction that happens before we even think. Right. And it's because, maybe we had a criticism from our mother. So when a feminine being suggests something, immediately we take it personal, and that's in our body. That's like a physical thing. And so a big part of what I do, and like what I'm going to continue to push the guys, because I hear these things of like, oh, I want to be present, or man, I still feel stuck and I can't, shift. And it's like, oh, well, what do your practices look like? Do you do breathwork? Do you do mindfulness? Do you, and this is stuff that I teach, and, there's recordings that I have for the guys, but this has been the most impactful thing for me. And we actually have to move that energy. And so through breath work and, things like Wim Hof or Kundalini yoga, this also could be like shaking and Qigong, and, you could use cold plunge in this way if you're very particular about it, to actually rewire your nervous system, right? So like, I don't know if you're familiar with, really popular in Kundalini yoga is ego eradicator. So it's like breath of fire, breathing out quickly through your nose, and your arms are up in the air for those that can't see, and thumbs up. And so basically like how this pose works, what is the transition is we're creating a lot of energy in the system, right? Which we could call the feminine. It's a lot of energy, and life is going to bring that, whether it's a feminine partner or work or the demands or stress. And then when it gets hard, it's, can you hold that pose? Can you actually relax into that pose? Can you be a yes into that pose? And you're rewiring your nervous system to hold space. Like we use this term a lot, like how do I hold space? And it's just holding energy, right? And it's increasing your capacity. And so the big piece that I see in a lot of men's work that is missing, or even therapy, right? Traditional therapy, like I think it's very valuable and it has a place, and I'm not knocking it, but if we just do talk therapy, like eventually we can get stuck into this loop. And actually it could negatively feed, that ghost. And so I think the big thing is having some sort of breath and embodiment practice to shift things up, to change our nervous system, to move that energy, in conjunction with all of the things that we've talked about. And it's not a quick fix. It's like it's 1% every day. And I breath work and mindfulness practices, I talk about it like prehab, for those in the fitness or strength and conditioning space, where it's like you got to do it so that when you need it, and it's like the example I always give of like breath work, because it's hard to notice in the moment, is like, you're driving, there's two people driving down the highway, and the first person doesn't do breath work. They get cut off, and immediately they give the middle finger, they honk the horn, they're all upset. They have this, automatic negative thought. And then there's another person who does breath work. They get cut off. The same exact thing happens. Like immediately they think they're frustrated, they're irritated. And then immediately, but before doing anything, they have another thought. They're like, oh, I could do nothing. They're like, oh, maybe this person is, has an emergency. Oh, maybe this person doesn't know where they are, right? And all of these other thoughts, we essentially have more space, like to hold that nervous system. So it's like that carries over to the day-to-day moment of like, when our boss brings us chaos, when our partner brings us a lot of emotion, it's the same thing. It's just energy. And can I build and grow this capacity to hold it and to be more grounded in myself? Last little thing I'll say is also just this work. It's so important, connecting to nature, getting outside, removing screens, and and that's true for everyone, but allowing yourself to be grounded, really creating more space.
Yeah, agreed. Like those personal practices are so important. And my Earth Day post yesterday was all about like, yeah, like let's bring like appreciation to nature today and like every single day, because you are one with nature. Like you do not move without the rhythms of nature. Like we are all one. The same source that's fueling nature is the same source that's fueling you. And I love the offerings you gave here for how to better support yourself and keep yourself grounded and prevent that mind, the chatter from interfering and being reactive. And I know when we opt into family dynamics, that can be even more important to have had under your belt so that you aren't as reactive. And then, yeah, my last question here is when you're interacting with somebody that is family and or is somebody that maybe you don't want to fully cut out of your world, yet they're having a difficult time meeting you in certain ways. How have you navigated circumstances like that?
Yeah, so again, I'll land on having these daily practices, right? And part of the thing is with this, when you do this more, you talk about connecting to nature, which I love. It's like it can be a quick practice. Like something I talk to my guys, like we start off every call with breath work or meditation to drop in, as you did before we got on this podcast. And then we'll get in the middle of the call, and sometimes I'll just be like, who's connected to their breath? is breathing deep into your belly. Like the practice is not this 20 minutes in the morning or at night. The practice is every day. Are we connecting to our breath? Are our feet rooted in the earth? So in a moment where I might find myself getting reactive, it's like, oh, can I breathe deeper? And can I root my feet into the ground? Can I imagine roots going 100 yards into the earth? And that can be a quick cue of like, oh yeah, I'm solid. I am connected, right? So that's part of why we build this practice, because then it can become a quick shift in any moment. But yeah, I think that's why, when it comes to family, right? Even for myself, it's like I can hold so much space and not take things personally. And then, you're around family or people close to you that you grew up with, and you just get triggered. Part of doing this work is you can have more compassion for others. A lot of men's work is also healing the father wound or relationships to fathers. But as you start to do this work and you see, wounds that come up, then you start to see, oh, well, now I see how my grandfather was and maybe what my father struggled with. And you can start to have more compassion. But that's where, often when we get reactive, and this is the shadow, right? Like anytime, like where there's reactivity, there's a wound, and often where we get the thing that irritates us in others, there's something to look inward, so when we can start to take full radical responsibility for ourselves and our own life, we can realize that like, okay, if I am getting upset and angry and reactive, I'm allowing this person to influence me. I'm allowing the story, the meaning of whatever is happening, I'm taking it personally, and then again, connecting back to the breath, you can notice your breathing is probably shallow. It's probably trapped in your chest, and so I think as you do this work, again, you start to build more capacity to hold that. But, we've talked about boundaries are really important, and you can choose in a loving way to say like, hey, I love you and I will love you. And I'm not going to talk about this with you. I'm not going to have these conversations, And I think even too, in this healing journey, it's like the same discernment you talked about earlier. Are they ready to have these conversations? Especially older generations, like, they maybe haven't done the work or they haven't been open to these ideas. So just because, and this is actually true of anyone, it doesn't really matter the generation. Like you could be doing a lot of internal work and then all of a sudden you want to tell your best friend all the things they need to start doing. Like that's not going to be well received, So just because you can see maybe how people show up or impact you, it's like, do you need to tell them? Because the most freedom, again, this goes back to having that confidence in yourself, is like, can you take ownership and responsibility? Because ultimately at the end of the day, like, I think words do matter. Like they can be hurtful, the whole sticks and stones break my bones, right? And, if your parents or someone you love said you're a piece of shit, that's going to hurt. But if a homeless person says that, it's not going to bother you, right? And so this is a lot of the work I do one-on-one. It's getting deeper to like, okay, what is the story? What are you making that mean about you and your relationship to that person? And can you cultivate a relationship with yourself? This is when we talk about like codependency or fears of abandonment or anxious attachment. It's like because we are using someone outside of us to create wholeness within us. And it's like, can we start to do that? So this was maybe a long-winded way of saying, taking ownership and loving yourself and asking like, okay, where is the irritation coming from? To move through that.
I love that. Yeah. And bringing it back into like what you're allowing and looking deeper and developing that relationship with yourself to get more clear on what it is that you're allowing and why, like where that pattern comes from. And something for me that I've been working on as I'm working to enhance the relationship with my mother and how we can communicate is letting her know, hey, the way that you responded didn't feel good for me and why. And this is something that I speak to my clients about, especially when we're working on relationships. And it's very, very common when you step into a new relationship or friendship or business partnership, whatever, usually it's more of the intimate and sexual partnerships, that we want to just like tell them everything that's happened to us in the past, like all the ways that our past partners like didn't show up or hurt us or caused us pain. And that is great. And in order for us to not trauma dump and lead our partner to then be fearful of like repeating similar patterns, it's important to also express, like, one, what you've learned from that experience about yourself, and two, making an ask or making a request or sharing what the shift has been for you. Because of that, I have learned this about myself, and I now know that it's important for me to have this, and it would feel really good for my partner to show up in this way. So you're going from this negative icky thing happened to taking ownership, and I learned this about me, to the wider scale, this is now what I want to create in my experience. And I think it's a much more powerful way of approaching the past than just like dumping the past in a container.
Yeah, it's often it can be the hardest and the most confronting. But essentially, and I've done the same thing, we're in the victim mindset when we are saying, well, this person, these relationships, I didn't like this. And what we don't like to often see about ourselves is we allowed that in some capacity. Mm-hmm. We allowed people to show up that way. We attracted that, actually, by not, healing our own stuff. And so, I mean, really everything, men's work, women's work, whatever, part of the personal growth journey you're on is like, can you take full ownership of like, okay, what did I play? Because a lot of this is unconscious of but we're actually attracting, within based on who we are. And that's why it's like always looking back. And yeah, I love the language. That's one of my favorite phrases that you mentioned with your mom is like, hey, it didn't feel good. Like, this didn't feel good, because it's not attacking. It's not like you did this, you suck at this, like, whatever. It's that shift is so powerful. It's like, it didn't feel good. And, I had something recently with my mother. I was going on this men's retreat to Death Valley in the desert, and it's completely off grid. There's no, we didn't have service, we didn't have everything. And my mom, just being who she is and loving me, and also the wild world we're in, and just gets nervous and like anxious of like, I won't be able to get in touch with you, and like, just who knows what wild shit is happening in the world. And at one point she actually asked me not to go. And I know where she's coming from because I'm doing this work. I can have this compassion for that. And also that didn't feel good. Like, that's projecting onto me, like, I need to live my life, and this is so important to me. Like this program I'm in this retreat, and I was able to share with her, hey, it didn't feel good. And this actually started from a conversation where I was kind of closed off. Like, she had asked about my trip, and then I kind of stopped sharing. And then later she texted me like, something feels off when I feel like I can't ask about your life. And I'm like, okay, actually I can see where I closed off, because when you ask about that, I'm afraid of you telling me again I can't go, and that doesn't feel good because this is really important to me. And that was actually led to a beautiful conversation where she's like, I totally understand where you're coming from. I'm sorry that I reacted that way. That was my fears coming up, and part of it was me taking ownership and just apologizing for like closing in that moment,
I love that. A beautiful opportunity was created for communication through recognition that you were allowing yourself to close off and being able to bring it forward and talk about it. And yeah, as we wrap up here, I want to bring all this conversation around to people talk about this quote unquote new world. And I personally don't really love that connotation, that way of thinking, because we're not getting a new world. Like, we're going to continue living in the world that we have. And I believe that we have an opportunity to step higher into levels of consciousness, to bring more awareness to the human race, and to become more integrated and mature humans. And so my question is, what do you see is possible when men step into this work, when women step into this work, and then they come together? And what do you see as possible on a small scale within their dynamic between themselves, and on a larger scale when we look at society as a whole?
Yeah, small question there. Yeah, I mean, essentially, I believe, when one man heals, the whole world can heal, right? Because a lot of the wounding, the issues we have in the world, it comes from our own wounding and trauma and not being healed, and how we show up in the world. So if a man can heal that internally, then he can show up to help other men heal. And then, even if we're not doing the work to help other people, it's like by me, myself, just showing up differently, energetically, holding more space, that's going to impact the people around me. They're going to feel safer around me. They're going to show up more authentically. It's, it's cliche, but like you change one life, you change the whole world, right? You can change all of these other lives. But yeah, I really believe part of this, we've interweaved a lot of things in this conversation. A big direction I'm going in my personal study, which I think is so connected to men's work, like you can't have it, is building a deeper relationship to nature and the earth, and also connecting deeper to our ancestors, right? Like this is this personal journey I've been on. Just learning about, doing DNA tests and these family trees, but also, again, you go far back enough and we all come from the same place. Like we all come from different tribes, and what a lot of us see, especially in America, we look at the Native American tribes and these indigenous cultures and the way they live. And they believe in this idea of animism where everything has a soul, rocks, trees, the earth. And they really have this reverence for the sun and for the water, and they're connected to earth, and like they have this sensitivity that is beyond of like, even I had a call with a mentor yesterday, and being able to just feel like the pressure change and the weather changing. It's like, oh, today's feel different pressure change, like probably not a good day to go like on a big hunt far away from camp. We had all of this. And if you study all these tribes all over the world, they had this way of being, they had connection to, God or spirit or whatever you want to call it, right? If we take religion aside for a moment. And I think that a lot of the modern day, problems of, climate change and, weather patterns and greed and the way that we're living and being disconnected and obesity and all of these things is because we've gone away from our roots. Like, get me wrong. I'm glad that I have heat in the winter of Colorado. There's a lot of beautiful things. But I think part of this work, personal growth, also needs to connect to getting back to this reverence for the earth and realizing, like, I love what you said. We only have one world. We only have one earth. And somewhere along the way, we didn't think, we felt like these tribes didn't have the wisdom because they didn't evolve, and they didn't create all these skills, but like they were actually really connected, so maybe not a path that you thought I would go, but it's just the more that I study this stuff, the more importance I see. And even this term of like, we say, oh, I'm going into nature this weekend. It's like, we are nature, and we forget that. And a lot of like, we're inside and we're on screens, and like depression and all of these things and anxiety. It's like, let's just, when I go at the pace of nature, right? The sun comes up and nature wakes up, and you can start to feel that. And then the sun starts to set and it slows down. And I could talk forever about this, but yeah, I think connecting those things, it can have a dramatic effect on the world where, when one person starts to heal, everyone else starts to view the world differently.
I love that. Yeah. And it's that uniting into one versus being separated into parts, right? Becoming the whole through connecting with the source that gives all of us life. And I was on a little walk with my friend last night, and just some of the witchy conversations that we have, but I looked at her, I was like, trees are living, breathing human beings, not humans, but living, breathing beings too. I was like, why don't we give trees names? Why do only humans have names? And and then my mind started going into like parts work, and I was like, well, humans have all these parts, like trees want to be recognized too. So we're walking around the neighborhood, like naming the trees in our neighborhood. It was a funny little comment there, but yeah, I very much agree. Very much agree. And a big and important part of my practice is stepping into my backyard every single day and being with the mountains, being with the grass, being with the animals, tuning into the sounds, the energy, the feelings that I have back there. And before I walk in the house, saying thank you over and over and over again to what holds me, to what nurtures me, to what protects me in my home and supports my vitality. because the ground underneath you, the trees, the roots, everything around you, the flowers, like it's all supporting you and your energy. And so just an invitation to bring more awareness and attention to the nature around you, to the space and the plants and the living, breathing things that are fueling your life source energy around where you currently are calling home. So thank you for that share. Yeah. And my last question for you is, if there is one thing that you could offer to the listener to encourage them into a more mindful evolution, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, it would be get to know yourself better. And the way I would offer that is getting curious. You know, what do I really desire? How does this feel in this moment? You know, being around these people. Do I feel more lifted up? Do I not? And just starting to question who you are and what you've been taught. You know, I think everything starts with knowing ourselves better, having a more of awareness of like who we want to be, how we want to show up, what we actually love, you know, and separating the conditioning of what we've been told, what society expects of us, how things are supposed to be. And there's a lot of ways that you can, you know, get to know yourself. I think this is the power of working with a coach or getting in a group, a men's circle, a women's circle, whatever. But just with yourself, like starting to ask, like, is this really what I want? Is this, you know, how does this feel in my body when I do this thing or this job? Like, what lights me up? You know, what would I do? You know, being a little unreasonable. Like, you don't have to follow through with it, but you know, if I had $1 million today, like, what would I really do? And just keep pulling back those layers. Is a great starting point to figure out, you know, the next step.
Beautiful. I agreed. Very much agreed. Diving into yourself, really getting to know yourself, love yourself, and honor yourself and your desires and what is aligned for you, and breaking free from those patterns that the world, that society, that your environments around you may be influencing you with, and what you're allowing. Taylor, thank you so much. It's been such an honor having you here. Have loved this conversation, and really, just really excited for the work that you're doing in the world and the way that you're showing up and supporting your clients, the way that you're showing up and supporting men. If anyone that is listening has interest in connecting with you, being a part of your men's groups, your membership community, where can they find you?
Yeah, thanks so much, Leah. This is super fun conversation. I imagine we could go on for hours. But yeah, 2 places, Instagram and my website. So on Instagram, I'm at Taylor_Sleaford, SLEAFORD. Or you can check my website, taylorsleaford.com. And everything's on there, from men's work to one-on-one coaching. And reach out if you just want to talk. I'd love to connect on Instagram. It doesn't even have to be, to hire me. Like, I love connecting with people. So reach out. Let's have a conversation.
Amazing. Yeah, I love how you show up, because it's clear that you love humans just as much as I do.
Thank you.
So Taylor, thanks again for being here. And I will put all of your information in the show notes so that the listener can more easily find and connect with you. And thank you all for tuning in today, and sending you so much love for the rest of your day. See you in the next episode.